Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy. It's Wednesday, the 29th of November, and I'm joined this evening by Maureen Watt. Hello, Maureen. You were an MSP, and now that you're retired, that means you're able to spend more time with us. And so, thank you for joining us this evening.
You're welcome, and sorry about the sound issues at the beginning there.
Yeah, we should probably apologise to our viewers, and we've had some gremlins this evening, but they're well and truly banished now. So I'll move on to the Ukraine update, day 644. A Ukrainian military intelligence official has confirmed that Mariana Budanova, the wife of Ukraine's intelligence head Kirilo Budanov, has been poisoned and was receiving treatment in hospital. Ms. Budanova fell ill reportedly after eating food laced with heavy metals. Dnipropetrovsk region governor Syrii Lysak has said that the Russian shells struck homes on Tuesday, killing 4 people and injuring at least 5. And I should give my apology for all the mispronunciations that I'm going to make in the course of this update. Tornadoes were forecast for the Black Sea region after a storm that killed at least 14 people and left more than 2 million people without electricity in Russia and Ukraine, including occupied Crimea. The Institute for the Study of War said the storm forced Russia to return all of its naval vessels and missile carriers to their bases. Excuse me. And suggested that the threat of mines drifting in the Black Sea would increase because the storm dispersed minefields. There were also reports that the storm damaged railways in coastal areas, which could have an impact on the Russian military's logistic capabilities in occupied Crimea and southern Ukraine. In an intelligence update, the UK Ministry of Defence said Russia had made small advances on the northern axis of a pincer movement as part of an attempt to surround Avdiivka, although Avdiivka has become a salient or bulge in the Ukrainian front line. Ukraine remains in control of a corridor of territory approximately 7 kilometres wide, through which it continues to supply the town. The US Senate will begin considering legislation that includes aid for Israel and Ukraine as soon as next week. The leader of the Democratic majority, Chuck Schumer, said on Tuesday, adding that an aid bill is needed even if there is no agreement with Republicans, who demand linked funding for US border security. Ukraine, Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania said their foreign ministers would boycott a meeting of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, that's the OSCE, in North Macedonia on Thursday and Friday because the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov intends to take part. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg urged members of the alliance to stay the course in supporting Ukraine in its war against Russia's invasion. And the EU has agreed to more than quadruple its spending on training Ukrainian soldiers, investing close to an extra €200 million. In a speech to Parliament, Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said military and financial support for Ukraine is of existential importance to Europe. Mr. Scholz said, "We will continue with this support as long as it is necessary. This support is of existential importance for Ukraine, but also for us in Europe. None of us want to imagine what even more serious consequences it would have for us if Putin won this war." So, Maureen, that's this evening's update from the Ukraine. Is there anything there that you'd maybe want to make comment on?
Yes, I think, given the war in the Middle East, it is really important that Ukraine doesn't fall off the agenda, which, to be honest, it seems to be doing. And Putin's coming up to an election, I think, next year, so he will be wanting to make sure that he's popular with his own electorate, with the Russian people. And you just wonder what he's going to be up to over winter when it's extremely difficult to conduct warfare. And yes, I really fear and have sympathy with the plight that the Ukrainians find themselves in when it's perhaps not of the top of most people's agenda as they seriously need.
Thank you, Maureen. I'll move on to, forgive me, I've got a frog in my throat this evening, so we'll move on to the Israel and Gaza situation. Residents of Gaza and the families and loved ones of those believed to be held hostage by Hamas are anxiously waiting to see if the fragile truce between Israel and Hamas will be extended. Fighting was paused on Friday, but today is the last day of the extended truce deal. US Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, told reporters today that the US is hopeful that the truce in Gaza between Israel and Hamas can be extended. Egyptian sources have told news agencies that negotiations for the release of further civilian hostages are going well and that the truce could be extended for 2 days. However, CNN is reporting that officials from the International Committee of the Red Cross have as yet been unable to visit hostages in Gaza, which is in contradiction to the truce agreement. The Al-Hassam Brigades, the armed division of Hamas, has said today that 10-month-old Kafir Bibas, his 4-year-old brother and their mother, who were being held hostage, have been killed during the Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli army said it is checking the claim. Israel says it believes there are 161 people seized in Israel on the 7th of October who are still being held captive in Gaza. The latest exchange of hostages in Gaza for Palestinian detainees in Israeli jails took place on Tuesday night. 12 hostages, 10 Israelis and 2 Thai nationals, are now in Israel. The 30 Palestinians released from Israeli prisons on Tuesday were 15 children and 15 women. In a statement, the Israel Prison Service said the 30 Palestinians were released from Ofer prison near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank and from a detention centre in Jerusalem. The UN has called for the international community to move towards a two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, saying Jerusalem should serve as the capital of both states. It is long past time to move in a determined, irreversible way towards a two-state solution on the basis of UN resolutions and international law, said Tatiana Valovaya, the Director General of the UN office in Geneva, delivering a speech authored by the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. The World Health Organization has today called for Gaza's vulnerable health infrastructure to be safeguarded as the war-torn territory faces an increased risk of epidemics and challenges in detecting infectious diseases. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has called Benjamin Netanyahu the butcher of Gaza and accused Israel's Prime Minister of spawning anti-Semitism across the world. Israel's military has claimed that it has killed Mohammed Zubidai, who it says was the commander of the Jenin branch of Palestinian Islamic Jihad during an operation inside the occupied city. The Palestinian Health Ministry said 2 Palestinian children were killed by Israeli forces. Video and photographs showed damage to houses, cars and roads during an operation said to involve hundreds of troops of the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF. The latest in a string of confrontations in the occupied Palestine city since the 7th of October. A Hamas official has said in addition to the releases as part of the truce deal, it is planning to release Russian hostages as a show of gratitude to Vladimir Putin and Russia's position on the conflict in Gaza. Maureen, was there anything there that caught your eye? Again, that was a very lengthy report, quite fulsome, but was there anything in particular that stood out?
Well, I think we've just got to be so relieved that hostages are being released, although not all of them, and clearly some are expected home and are not possibly going to return because they've been killed by who exactly we don't know, and whether we'll ever know. I think it was interesting, prior to the start of the hostage release, that there were marches by those family members and their supporters um, to the government and to Netanyahu's government, whom we've got to remember is extremely right wing, and he doesn't command the support of the majority of the population. He has to rely on deals with other parties. So, um, how this whole conflict is going to pan out, we really don't know. But I think, as many have suggested in your report, Brian, the two-state solution seems to me and many others to be the only long-term solution, but that's not exactly what we see Israel wanting, and it just depends on how long they're prepared to be at war for, to try and secure their aims.
Thank you, Maureen. And you mentioned a two-state solution. The First Minister and Stephen Flynn at PMQs both called for the UK government to recognise Palestine as a legitimate state. Do you think that would help us get towards a two-state solution?
Yes, I think it could. I mean, you know, we can't revisit what happened in the late 1940s and the creation of the state of Israel by the Allies. And we are living with the consequences of that not being thought through properly. And all countries, I think, have got to deal with this and help both sides come to a solution that is long lasting, because otherwise we're going to get these flare ups every now and again. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the ones in the late 60s and 70s. So until we get a long lasting peace, Palestine certainly is not going to feel in any way secure and can make the progress that it needs.
Thank you, Maureen. For our next item, there's been a new poll for STV News by Ipsos Scotland that's found that support for Scotland being an independent country is still higher than support for remaining part of the UK. Among those with a voting intention and very likely to vote, 54% say they would vote yes in an immediate referendum, while 46% say they would vote no. Other findings in the poll include the SNP is leading Labour by 10 points on Westminster general election voting intentions and by 12 points on Scottish Parliament constituency voting intention. Humza Yousaf has a net satisfaction rating of -13, with 35% satisfied with his performance as First Minister and 48% dissatisfied. Rishi Sunak's ratings among the Scottish public have worsened, with 72% dissatisfied with his performance as Prime Minister now, compared with 53% a year ago. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross receives a negative net satisfaction rating of -27. Dissatisfaction with Rishi Sunak has increased markedly since our last poll. He receives a negative net satisfaction rating from Scots of -53, compared with -29 in May 2023 and -21 in December 2022. 19% are satisfied and 72% dissatisfied with his performance as Prime Minister. Dissatisfaction with Sir Keir Starmer has also increased since May. 32% are satisfied with his performance as leader of the UK Labour Party, while 52% are dissatisfied, giving him a net satisfaction rating of -20 compared with -12 in May. Responding to the poll, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown, MSP, said, "The SNP will continue to work as hard as we can every day to improve the lives of people in this country. By contrast, it has never been clearer that Westminster just doesn't work for Scotland. There is a choice between two futures: an independent Scotland with full powers to build a better country, or a Westminster system and Brexit-based UK economy which is driving down people's living standards. We take absolutely nothing for granted and will redouble our efforts with the powers we have to help communities and businesses. Independent countries that are like Scotland are fairer and wealthier than the UK, so why not Scotland?" So, Maureen, this poll by Ipsos Mori, am I right in saying that that's the company that's usually seen as a gold standard when it comes to polling on this question?
Well, it's certainly been around for a long time and has a longer reputation than some of the other ones. And it is, I think it was an Ipsos Mori poll along with STV, although I haven't seen much coverage of it on any of the mainstream media. I mean, it is a very good poll for independence. The independence vote is stable and increasing. If I was about to go into a referendum on a starting vote of 54%, I'd be saying bring it on, because we can certainly win on that basis. And I mean, people have to seriously think before voting at a general election whether they want continuation of the Tories or replacing them with red Tories, because Keir Starmer has said that he will continue many of the Tory policies, or continue to vote for the Scottish National Party, who are the only ones who can deliver on independence and bring about the well-being economy, which will see fairness and justice for all, compared to just filling the coffers of the rich, which we've seen since 2010 and the Tory Liberal Democrat coalition government.
Thank you, Maureen, and I'm happy to be corrected on this if you think I'm wrong, but a wee shout out to Professor John Robertson and his Talking Up Scotland 2 blog. He raises the point that polls that use the 2014 referendum as their baseline, they tend to suppress the yes vote consistently. He said the recent Ipsos Mori poll bases its sample in the light of demographic change, including more young Scots yes voters entering the electorate, and people, older demographics, older people who have died on both sides of the debate, I would say both yes and no, and we've lost a lot of loved ones there. So basically they're saying that companies like Ipsos Mori, they haven't kept up to date with the current people that are voting. Have you had any views on that?
Well, that's interesting to hear. I'll have to go and follow that up. But it is really important that our pollsters are really basing their samples on the demographic of Scotland as it is today, not as it was back then. I mean, I saw a poll the other day which said that Britain wasn't really a racist country compared to other countries, and it was a poll done over of 500 or 600 people over 12 EU countries in 2014, 2015, 16. So you really have got to look at the small print and the accompanying bits rather than just the graphs in many of these polls.
Thank you, Maureen. So I'll move on to the next item. Scotland's onshore GDP grew by 0.1% in September, according to statistics announced today by the chief statistician. I've got problems with that word, forgive me. This follows 0.2% growth in August, revised up from 0.1%. In September, output in the services sector, which accounts for around 3/4 of the economy, is estimated to have fallen by 0.4%, after growth of 0.4% in August. The production sector output grew by 2.7% in September, with growth of 17% in electricity and gas supply, making the largest positive contribution to the overall GDP result. In the 3 months to September, GDP is estimated to have grown by 0.4% compared to the previous 3-month period. This reflects a growth in the economy during the third quarter of 2023, after the 0.3% contraction in quarter 2 in 2023, forgive me, which is April to June, reported in the quarterly national accounts released on the 1st of November 2023. Today, the chief statistician has also released Export Statistics Scotland 2021, which provides estimates of the value of Scotland's exports, but that excludes oil and gas, by industry and destination for 2019 to 2021. It reveals that despite a small 6.2% increase in 2021 to £31.3 billion, the estimated value of Scotland's international exports remained lower than before the pandemic, which was 11.5% lower than in 2019. In contrast, the value of Scotland's exports to the rest of the UK was 4% higher in 2021 compared to 2019. This was driven by a strong growth in the value of Scotland's utilities exports to the rest of the UK, which increased by 44.9%, which is £1.6 billion, between 2019 and 2021. Exports to the rest of the UK valued an estimated £48.6 billion and accounted for the majority, that's 61%, of the total value of Scotland's total exports in 2021. Declines in the value of international exports for several sectors, including financial and insurance activities and transportation and storage, contributed to the drop in international export value between 2019 and 2021. Food, beverages and tobacco remains the largest industry sector for Scotland's international exports, accounting for a fifth, that's 20%, of Scotland's international export value in 2021. The USA remains Scotland's largest international export destination, accounting for 16% of Scotland's international export value in 2021. Commenting, Wellbeing Economy Secretary Neil Gray said, "These figures show the robustness of the Scottish economy despite the stiff headwinds faced by countries around the world. We are doing all we can with the limited powers available to us, including supporting business exports to produce increased international sales as part of the autumn statement. Scotland needed a fair deal on investment for businesses, infrastructure and public services. The UK government has failed to deliver on every count." Scottish businesses also continue to suffer due to Brexit effect on supply chains, trade and the free movement of people. "I am not content with minimal growth levels for Scotland as part of the UK." So, Maureen, let me see if I can find my notes for this. My question here is, how do you, based on these figures, how do you think Scotland's economy is doing? And do you think, is it being held back by Westminster, as Stephen Gray implied?
Yeah, so I mean, Scotland's economy, in my view, has, as long as I've been in politics, been held back by the Westminster government, and that was an awful lot of statistics in your introduction of this piece there, Brian, and difficult to get your head round them all. But clearly, we can see that post the COVID pandemic, the economy has still to recover, and Brexit is still having a huge effect on Scotland's economy, as we predicted, and that's why Scotland voted against coming out of the EU. Finding new markets is not all that easy because you're going into places where there are already are suppliers. So, given all that, I think Scotland, the Scottish government, much to the chagrin of the Westminster government, spends a lot of time in helping our exporters at international fairs and international meeting customers and things, which obviously pay dividends. And that is, I think, a major part of government being able to help business in that area, where we have export-led companies. Together with that, and providing the best kind of infrastructure that we need for um, businesses to grow, that's difficult because of the settlement that we have from Westminster. And then the other aspect of business is labour, and again that's been severely impacted by Brexit, and no sign given Westminster's immigration policies how this is going to get any better anytime soon. So yeah, I think the economy is still going to struggle under the chain of Westminster, and we know, um, with the type of economy that we want to have in an independent Scotland, that we can do so much better.
Thank you, Maureen. I mean, apologies for the density of these economics reports. Neither you nor I, as an economist, as we keep saying on here. But I'll just pick out. There's one line in the report which I think might be worth going back on. It said the value of Scotland's exports to the rest of the UK was 4% higher in 2021, and that was driven by a strong growth in the value of Scotland's utilities exports to the rest of the UK. So does that mean that just as was the case when we were exporting oil, and now that we're exporting renewables, Scotland's keeping the lights on in the rest of the UK?
Absolutely, and we could grow that so much more if we had the infrastructure, in terms of the national grid being upgraded. I've talked on this program before about how the grid is not serving people at its best because of the delays on getting connected to the grid. So with our natural resources of wind, wave, tidal and other energy hydro sources, we could be powering not just ourselves, which we can do, but also the rest of the UK if the grid structure was in place. And that's solely down to the Westminster government not giving the go ahead early enough for that to happen.
Thank you, Maureen. The next item is the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, otherwise known as the OECD, said the chances of policymakers getting it wrong were pretty high and posed a threat to its central soft landing forecast for the global economy. The OECD has warned that continued tough action by the Bank of England to tackle stubborn inflation risks tipping the UK into recession next year. The Paris-based OECD, which has 38 rich country members, said its best estimate is that the UK would suffer a second year of sluggish growth in 2024 and foresaw little prospect of a pre-election surge in activity. In its half-yearly economic outlook, the OECD said UK growth would remain stable but low, with national output rising by 0.5% in 2023 and by 0.7% in 2024. 6 months ago, it was predicting expansion of 0.3% this year and 1% next. Despite speculation that the recent fall in inflation would bring forward cuts in interest rates from the Bank of England to next spring, the OECD said it expected official borrowing costs to remain unchanged at 5.25% for the whole of 2024. Meanwhile, the phasing out of energy subsidies and the impact of freezing tax allowances and thresholds would mean the Treasury sucking 2% of gross domestic product, that's about £50 billion, out of the economy. Claire Lombardelli, the OECD's chief economist, said a soft landing for advanced economies was far from guaranteed, adding the risks around it are pretty high. Commenting, the SNP's economy spokesperson, Drew Hendry, said, Scotland needs to escape the endless austerity and incompetence of Westminster governments. We don't vote for and become an independent country inside the EU. I'm not sure again, I got that sentence right. I'm going to try it again. Scotland needs to escape the endless austerity and incompetence of Westminster governments we don't vote for and become an independent country inside the EU. It is the only way to grow our economy and protect household budgets. The Tory government had a chance to turn things around in the autumn statement by putting money into people's pockets through a £400 energy rebate and mortgage tax relief as the SNP called for. Instead, they chose to prioritise tax cuts for the rich and cut funding for public services, including our vital NHS. So, Maureen, I was in this chair when we talked about the autumn statement the other day there, and a couple of points that I took from that was one that the UK at the moment has got the highest tax burden since 1948, which is the end of the Second World War, and that's even if we go through all the Tory governments, including Margaret Thatcher's, and we found out that. Mr Hunt had found £203 billion for tax cuts by not funding public services. And then the other thing is, which seems to chime with what the OECD says, our very own Office for Budget Responsibilities, the OBR, has downgraded growth in the UK for the next 3 years, which seems to chime with the figures that the OECD are given here. So I haven't really given you much of a question, but do you think, I suppose essentially this makes life tough for everybody, for folk in the streets?
Yeah, we can talk about it at two levels. And in terms of the macroeconomics of this, I always would like to see how we're faring compared to other countries, because we've all gone through COVID, and then we can work out the Brexit effect on the economy in the British Isles. So it's interesting to make comparisons there. Um, the Bank of England keeping, well, at least it's stopped increasing interest rates, which is a good thing. We'll see how often in the months ahead they're going to keep it stable before they think that they can decrease it. I hope to goodness that they don't start increasing it. I think that would be really hard on households. And one of the, you talked about the cost of energy, which I speak to so many people who say, well, they haven't put on their heating yet, even though it's been freezing here today. And that's really worrying for people's health. But in this country, we've got such terrible food inflation at the moment. That's been something that has been on the mainstream media today. The cost of basics, including formula milk, has gone up hugely. And I think until we can see the price of food, people's food baskets coming down, I think, plus, of course, their energy bills, and I doubt we're going to see that anytime soon because of the volatility of the oil price, and all the energy sources are pegged to the gas price, I think. So it's really difficult, I think, to make predictions other than I don't think people are going to feel relaxed and happier anytime soon because of the way that the Tories are running this government. And it could be so much different when you look at other countries. I was sitting in a train from Edinburgh yesterday with a whole bunch of Norwegians around us. And they were really happy and, discussing their work together and looking at each other's laptops and, not a care in the world. And I'm just thinking, oh, why can't we have that?
Yeah, what is it the SNP are saying? Why not Scotland? I'll just pick out one line from this report again, which says the OECD has warned that continued tough action by the Bank of England to tackle stubborn inflation risks tipping the UK into recession next year. I mean, you mentioned that in your answer, Maureen, but do you think does that mean that our Tory policies are actively making the economy unstable?
Yeah, I mean, business, it's interesting. In some more fair out uh, press and media, you can see that uh, big business is really more interested to hear nowadays what the Labour Party are doing and propose, rather than sticking with the Tories, whom I think business has given up on, really, because if they have a plan, it's certainly not working. And we hear that business needs stability and they need to know what's happening. And basically, we just seem to be bumping along at the moment, with the Tories not having any real plan. And, we have seen, as I've mentioned before on this programme, other countries having plans of really having huge investment in infrastructure and things to boost the economy. And we've had none of that in this country. And it needs bold measures to change the way the country's run at the moment. And that is certainly not happening. It's not giving people who want to start a business any help, any hope of seeing interest rates come down so that they're manageable within your business plan. So I think that's why we're all crying out for an election to at least get a government that will have hopefully 5 years to make a go of it. And of course, in Scotland, we do want to do things differently, and that is why I will continue to work for an independent Scotland.
Thank you, Maureen. The next item is the investor panel brought together. Forgive me. The investor panel brought together experts in investing finance to advise on how the Scottish Government can create the right conditions to attract global capital investment to support the physical infrastructure required for a just transition. In coming to its recommendations, it examined the characteristics and practices of areas that investors find attractive, particularly Western Australia and the Republic of Ireland, but also Portugal, Canada, Singapore and Norway. First Minister Humza Yousaf said that while progress is already underway on some of the recommendations made by the investor panel, its insights would help to inform the strategic direction of the government in driving investments to Scotland. The panel's recommendations include fully considering the views and implications for investors when developing and delivering policy and legislation, establishing a pipeline of planned, costed and shaped infrastructure priorities, developing a streamlined and focused approach to building and managing relationships with investors across the Scottish Government, its agencies and the wider public sector. The First Minister said, "Opportunity is a defining mission for my government, and the Scottish Government's focus is on delivering a just transition to net zero while seizing on the massive economic opportunities that represents. I am grateful to Angus McPherson and the panel for their work in setting out these recommendations." He went on to say, "Delivering the physical infrastructure necessary for a just transition to net zero will require public and private capital investment on an unprecedented scale over many years, at a time when public finances are extremely stretched. Attracting more investment to Scotland has the potential to generate significant economic growth and create new jobs and industries right across the country. Discussions with the panel over recent months have already begun to inform decisions we have taken, including our commitment to funding to leverage private investment in ports and manufacturing and assembly work critical for offshore renewables. There is still more to be done if Scotland is to emulate destinations that investors find most attractive, and we will examine how best to implement the panel's recommendations, including through the forthcoming Green Industrial Strategy." So, Maureen, this is something that I hadn't really heard about before, but when I was reading about it, it's fascinating, I think. It's about how do we deliver net zero, which most people would just think about, use less energy and switch to electric cars and don't burn fossil fuels and use renewables. This instead is saying this isn't just like building the Queensferry crossing. This is an enormous task for Scotland to get to net zero. We're going to need both public sector and businesses to work together. And so businesses are going to have to part with their cash. So the Scottish Government has to provide a system whereby businesses feel that they're going to be able to do that and make a profit. Otherwise, they're not going to invest. So I suppose my question is, if we're talking about attracting businesses, making Scotland attractive to business and on a huge scale to achieve net zero, isn't that going to mean giving up workers' rights and lowering standards? Isn't that the usual trade-off? No?
No, no, because well, to deal with that point first, absolutely not, because you find in other countries that growth is higher because they treat their staff and workers and employees better. So if you have decent wages where people are not struggling on minimum wage, on having to do 3 jobs, and are looked after, are got security of employment, then they have higher productivity. It's not rocket science, is it? So that's one thing. The second thing is that we start from a base where pre-COVID, and I don't know what the most up-to-date figures are, Scotland was the third, in third place of attracting inward investment after London and the southeast of England. So we have a good reputation to build on. I think what's changed is that most companies now, not the Westminster government, see that net zero is a huge business opportunity that is definitely going to be there, and that is what the world sees as being the way to go forward. So while Rishi Sunak still talks about petrol-driven cars, the rest of us are trying to make business opportunities out of net zero. And as you said, Brian, there's a huge amount of work to do. If you just think about the number of houses that need to be changed away from being heated by gas to other sources of energy. And then, as you say, there's no reason why Scotland shouldn't have making facilities, and as you mentioned, particularly manufacture and assembly work in relation to offshore and onshore wind, for which there is still a huge potential. So the business opportunities are there in Scotland. There are business opportunities in hydrogen. I remember when I was in Parliament still, and that's getting further and further away, talking to business people about the possibilities of hydrogen. So I think internationally, the Scottish Government is more on the same page as business internationally. So I think these talks and going forward, there are huge opportunities for Scotland. And, you know, in the past, the SNP have been being accused of not being pro-business. I think this demonstrates hugely how the SNP has been and is still very much pro-business in making sure that Scotland grows.
Thank you, Maureen. I'm happy to consider myself tell. The expression on your face at the start of that question spoke volumes. But just a wee bit more.
Sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's a great answer. The investor panel stated that the scale of the problem that Scotland faces, it's like a huge country like China or America. Scotland's tiny in comparison. They said Scotland's population, entire population, is less than any of the largest 15 cities in China. So that's how big we are, and yet we've got to try and attract business. The investor panel also said that their aim was that the Scottish Government should exploit Scotland's intimacy. And the First Minister went on to say that Scotland should be, an independent Scotland could be nimble. So what do you think that means when it comes to this subject?
I think, we see other small countries the size of Scotland doing very much better because they can make their own decisions as independent countries. And Scotland has unique selling points in terms of a highly educated population, excellent universities, lots of R&D, research and development, not just in the universities, but in cooperation with companies. And we've still got that entrepreneurial and inventive spirit that Scotland has been famous for, coupled with the fact that it's a great place to live. We complain about our temperate climate, but it's becoming increasingly a good place to live. So all of these selling points of Scotland does make it an attractive place for people to do business. And, these are things that government can influence. Like, I was just talking to somebody the other day about how Scotland's, despite the protestations of the opposition parties, is a great place to bring up children because we have good schools and well, excellent schools and excellent universities, and we look after children from cradle till they leave school and beyond. So why wouldn't you want to invest in Scotland, really?
Thank you, Maureen. So our next item is most companies sponsoring the United Nations climate talks in Dubai are not committed to cutting their greenhouse gas emissions in line with globally recognised net zero targets, it has been revealed. Only one of the more than 20 sponsors of COP28 has signed up to UN-backed net zero science-based targets, that's the SBTI, according to analysis. Most of the corporate sponsors, which include the oilfield services company Baker Hughes, as well as Bank of America, have made no commitment to reduce emissions to net zero in any time period under the target system. The global accountancy firm EY, formerly Ernst & Young, which has been hired as the independent verifier of the climate record of all the sponsors, has also not set targets with the net zero scheme. The targets are recognised as one of the leading voluntary global validations of a company's commitment to tackling global heating. The targets are clearly defined science-based pathways for companies and financial institutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and they are reviewed and validated by the SBTI. 6 firms sponsoring the Dubai climate talks, which begin on the 30th of November, including EY, have made a commitment to set net zero targets by registering with the scheme. This requires them to submit their plans for validation within 24 months, but only one corporation, the renewable energy company Iberdrola, is a validated member of the SBTI scheme with a fully committed target date for cutting its emissions. The sponsorship committee in the United Arab Emirates, which holds the COP presidency this year, said organisations seeking to sponsor the event were required to submit their commitments to net zero and climate action as part of their sponsorship applications. However, its wording leaves wriggle room for sponsors by only saying that they need to be signed up to the credible net zero transition plans by 2030 and 2050 based on SBTI, rather than the globally recognised scheme itself. The SBTI is recognised as a reputable global validation scheme to encourage big corporations to cut their carbon footprint. This year, Amazon was removed from the scheme after suggesting it was not going to meet its promised emission reductions. Amazon had pledged in 2019 to eliminate or offset all of its carbon emissions by 2040, signing up to voluntary targets with the SBTI in 2020 to verify its progress. The net zero standards requires companies to set long-term science-based targets to cut all possible emissions before 2050. Most companies must reduce emissions by more than 90%. Maureen, just that first line in the report again, that most companies sponsoring the UN climate talks in Dubai are not committed to cutting their greenhouse gas emissions. This is quite shocking by businesses, isn't it?
You know, Brian, I've got real worries about the COP meetings and how they seem to be, have been, or are increasingly, shall I say, being taken over by big business. You know, God forbid that we get to the situation where COP is just a get together of big business, a bit like Davos in the winter. And what you've read out and what you're saying in that report is very worrying, because I think that confirms what I have just said to you, and I've been thinking about that not just till this item came up, but you know, in weeks gone by. So it is really worrying, and it's really worrying that NGOs find it, and smaller, poorer countries find it increasingly difficult to afford to be able to send people to these meetings. And as I say, it's really, somebody needs to get a grip on the COP meetings so that they don't, as I say, turn out to be a jolly for big businesses who are quite happy to be sponsors, to have their name bandied about, but aren't really committed by deeds rather than words, by getting their own house in order first before they start trying to influence other people. So yeah, this is a disturbing item on the agenda tonight.
Two words that didn't appear in the report were hypocrisy and greenwashing. I would hazard to say. But so the next item is Rishi Sunak has rejected the suggestion that Brexit could be in peril after Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, said that the UK could rejoin the European Union. At an event in Brussels on Tuesday night, von der Leyen admitted that European leaders had goofed up over the departure of Britain from the bloc and suggested the younger generation could fix it. Asked if the UK could ever rejoin the EU, she replied, "I must say, I keep telling my children, you have to fix it. We goofed it up, you have to fix it." So I think here too, the direction of travel, my personal opinion, is clear. Responding, Rishi Sunak's official spokesperson told reporters that the Prime Minister did not believe that Brexit was in peril. The spokesperson said, "It's through our Brexit freedoms that we are, right now, considering how to further strengthen our migration system." Ursula, forgive me. Ursula von der Leyen made the comments at an awards ceremony staged by Politico. Relations between the EU and the UK have improved following their near collapse under Johnson and David Frost, who negotiated the Brexit trade deal. Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has said he wants to improve relations with the EU, but has ruled out the possibility of the UK rejoining under a UK Labour government. So, Maureen, whether Labour or the Conservative Party win the next general election, there's going to be no change in the government's stand in relation to the European Union. But the EU is now saying that they will take back the UK. Do you think, would they consider taking it back in instalments, with an independent Scotland first, followed by Northern Ireland and Wales, and then perhaps, if they're lucky at the cow's tail, England? But I wouldn't put any money on that one.
Well, that's certainly a possibility for England to rejoin the EU, but Scotland can't wait for that to carry on. We have got to have independence and back into the EU as soon as possible, because we've seen the disaster that it has been. And never forget that Scotland was taken out against her will, and young people certainly are against Brexit and want to be fully part of the EU, and they perhaps have seen it more than most, where the amount of travel under the Erasmus scheme and joint working in universities and so on has been so severely curtailed. So I think it's important to remind our young people of that when it comes to voting intentions, because it is only through an independent Scotland that we will get back in the EU. And of course, the EU at various levels, through various people, have said that they would welcome Scotland with open arms.
Thank you, Maureen. So Newsnight is to become a 30-minute programme as part of the BBC's wider plans to make £500 million of savings, the corporation has said. As part of the changes announced by the BBC, an extended hour-long edition of BBC News at 1 will relocate to Salford, and BBC Breakfast, also broadcast from Salford, will be extended for an extra 15 minutes daily, the corporation said. The corporation expects the changes to save £7.5 million as part of the plan to save £500 million. More than half of Newsnight's 60 jobs will be cut, with the corporation saying in a release that the programme would become a 30-minute interview, debate and discussion show. Deborah Turness, the BBC's chief executive of news and current affairs, said, like many businesses, we are in a tough financial climate, and as our audiences shift rapidly from TV to online news consumption, we need to make choices about where we allocate our resources. While TV and radio remain crucial to BBC News, we must invest in our digital platforms to ensure they are also the home of our very best journalism, and today's package of measures will accelerate this transformation. Maureen, I'm just wondering, these shorter times for Newsnight, which was a flagship show not that long ago, do you think savings are the real reason for cutting the timings, or are there maybe some other factors running underneath?
Well, I mean, I don't know why they are going to cut Newsnight. I can't see that any surveys would have shown them that that was a good idea, because many people who have missed news throughout the day often tune into Newsnight just to get a more in-depth analysis of some of the things that have been going on. If they want to make savings, then they could move lock, stock, and barrel out of the centre of London to Salford, or at least just keep a studio with minimum staff in London. I just worry when we're talking about that, whether regional broadcast, regional broadcasting will be the next thing that they look at. I mean, I think if that happens, then who's going to listen or watch anything on the BBC anymore? So I think mainstream media is in a bit of a quandary as to how to deal with the digital age, and how to encourage a younger audience. But seriously, cutting Newsnight, which, as I say, is probably something that a lot of older people, and as I say, people who want a quick catch up of the news watch, is not, I would have thought, the best idea to come up with.
Thank you, Maureen. And I'm going to be a bit cheeky and take an opportunity to say that if you consider how few staff we have here and what we get by on here at Broadcasting Scotland. And if you're unhappy with the mainstream media, then maybe you should consider taking out a subscription to help what I would call the antidote to all of that. But anyway, so I better move on to the last story so that you can get back to your the real world. A trial to
and that you can have a quick toddy for your, and that you can have a toddy for your cold.
It is, yeah, and it is bitterly cold in Glasgow today. I can tell you. I'm sure it is where you are too. A trial to research the economic opportunities and environmental impacts of electrofishing for razor clams has been extended for a further 12 months. The extension aims to strengthen the evidence base and inform future decisions about capacity for a sustainable razor clam fishery in Scottish waters, including developing fisheries management measures. Scottish razor clams are a prized delicacy in many parts of the world, particularly in Far Eastern markets. Prior to the trial, some vessels were illegally using electricity to fish for the species, giving rise to concerns over the impact on the marine environment and health and safety. Electrofishing harvesting involves inshore fishing vessels slowly and gently pulling electrodes over the seabed to draw out razor clams buried in shallow sand, which are then collected by hand. Conducted by the Scottish Government, the Health and Safety Executive and Food Standards Scotland, the trial began in 2018 and has now been extended to the 31st of January 2025. Authorised vessels taking part in the trial are subject to strict terms and conditions and exempt from a ban on electrofishing in the EU and a ban on fishing and landing razor clams in Scotland. Existing evidence shows that electrofishing has the potential to produce high quality catch with a lower impact on the marine environment than alternative methods such as dredging. Previous studies have suggested that electrofishing does not have an immediate or short-term lethal effect on these species exposed to electricity. Minister for Energy and the Environment, Gillian Martin, said, "This unique and innovative trial brings together fishers, scientists, policymakers and academia to carefully explore the opportunity of diversifying inshore fishing through technology innovation. Our Blue Economy vision is to be a global leader in supplying sustainably sourced and high-quality seafood at home and abroad. While there is significant potential for positive economic benefit to coastal communities from a carefully regulated and managed electrofishery for razor clams, there are legitimate concerns over the use of electricity in fishing. We aim to address this through the remainder of the trial." So, Maureen, I don't know if you've ever tasted razor clams. You don't often, well, you never see them in supermarkets. You sometimes see them in good fishmongers. Oh, really? Oh, Voice in the Ear says you get them in Morrison's. I don't shop there. I don't have one near me. I can't help thinking there was a way where you could get them to come up out of the sand. Was it by stomping on the beach or something like that? But anyway, to get back to more important matters, do you think there's a parallel here in that we're told that here in the UK we should get away from just eating haddock and eat other seafood that we've got, which we excel in and which tends to get exported to foreign markets, even though it's considered the best?
Yeah, well, I do remember going along the beach and seeing them, just a tip of them, and then digging them out. I think back then it was mainly for their shells rather than to play with their shells or use their shells for making pictures rather than eating them. But the fact that we can harvest enough to make a market of it seems really innovative. And if it's a highly prized, then that all contributes to our exports of highly prized food and drink, which of course I should have mentioned when we were talking about the attractiveness of Scotland to inward investment and people coming to live and work here. But yeah, it's obviously, electro fishing is much better than dredging. It won't have such a long term effect, but it's a really interesting story about how we can, as I say, get enough to make it a viable um, um, species to market abroad. And yeah, if it looks like it can be sustainably done and increased, then why not?
deep fried razor clams, or a razor clam supper. Maybe, you never know. But well, thank you, Maureen. That's the end of the show, and we're a wee bit late. But thank you for bearing with us and for your patience. But that's it for this evening. But before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We need to reach our £30,000 target to pay our bills. It's incredibly pressing. But due to your generosity, we've raised over £21,000. But we still need to raise the remaining £9,000, and it is getting urgent. But good night, and thank you for watching. Before we go, just once again, thank you, Maureen, for your patience with us this evening.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Good night.